And welcome to the Research Works podcast, brought to you in association with Curtin University and the Healthy Strides Foundation. Your hosts are Dr. Dana Poole and Dr. Ashley Thornton, and together we will interview world-leading researchers in the area of child health to support your practice in being more evidence-based.
The team at the Research Works podcast acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land and waters on which we live and work. We pay our respects to all First Nations peoples, elders past and present, and would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we record this podcast each week, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation. We recognise their continued connection to this beautiful budja we call home.
Well, welcome back to another episode of the Research Works podcast. Another week, another episode, and I can tell that you guys have all been listening. There's been so many downloads in all of our recent podcast episodes. We're just so glad that it's something that you guys can access and listen to, because we love doing this and we do this for you guys.
We definitely do, and I missed you all last week.
I missed you too. I missed you too. It was lovely to have Marissa.
Yeah.
But, we do this together.
We
it's
do.
fun.
Yeah, and huge thanks to Marissa for stepping in last week. It sounded like such a great episode, and hopefully everyone's been tuning in.
It's been really, really cool. So it's been wonderful. It's lovely to have you back as well. You have been on holiday, so you're looking very refreshed.
Oh, thank you. Not for long.
It doesn't take long to catch up, hey?
Well, we have another wonderful guest this week.
We do.
And we'd like to introduce you to the wonderful PhD student Nadine Smith from Perth Children's Hospital. Hi, Nadine.
Hi, Ash. Hi, Dana.
Hello, Nadine.
Oh, we're so excited to have you here today. It's always nice when we get a guest in the room with us, isn't it?
So much fun. It's nice to see people in person, in 3D.
And we've got a really interesting article to talk to you all about today. And I think, it's really relevant for people who are thinking about getting into research and want to answer clinical questions in a really meaningful way. So from a study design perspective, I think this will be quite unique for a lot of our listeners. The paper that we're going to talk about is titled The Effect of Targeted Movement Interventions on Pain and Quality of Life in Children with Dyskinetic Cerebral Palsy, a pilot single-subject research design to test feasibility of parent-reported assessments. This article was published in Disability and Rehabilitation just a few weeks ago, so it's another hot off-the-press paper for us to talk about today.
I love it.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you, Nadine. So let's tell our listeners a little bit about Nadine. Nadine's a physiotherapist who works in the Movement Disorders Program for Kids Rehab WA at Perth Children's Hospital. She has a special interest in children who have dyskinetic cerebral palsy and assessment of pain when children cannot self-report. Nadine's a member of 3 national research collaborations: 2, the Selective Dorsal Rhizotomy Research Registry and the Intrathecal Baclofen Research Registry she helped to establish, and the National Pain in Cerebral Palsy Interest Group, which she leads and chairs. Her recent research has focused on movement interventions for children to decrease pain, and she works really closely with families and people with cerebral palsy to understand how pain can be better managed, which is actually the overarching aim of her PhD studies that she's embarking on at the moment.
Oh, gosh, Nadine, I love it. I absolutely love it. And I think the part that I'm really excited about is, I've known you for a really long time. Actually, we used to share an office together. And the fact that we have, just seeing your clinical journey and what things that you've established and now going into research, it's just another example of, how you might not have the intentions of doing a PhD, but sometimes you just have these burning questions that lead to that point. So it's been really cool. Have you been enjoying the PhD journey so far?
I really have. It's a real team. I'm very supported by my supervisors, of one whom is Ash. And she looks after me very well. I think the thing is, there's so much inequity out there still for children with disabilities. And for me, this is really about the families and the kids. And if we can get better pain assessment, hopefully they can access more best practice therapy. So I'm very passionate about it.
I love it. That's so cool, Nadine.
Yeah, and I think that really comes across every time you talk to us and other people, Nadine, is, your passion for this topic and to help these families really shines through.
It does.
And I'm sure you'll all you'll all get to hear that when we get stuck into this paper. But before we do that, we like to ask a little icebreaker question. And I did have a bit of a laugh when I put this one down for our conversation today. At the risk of sounding a little bit ageist, my icebreaker question today is, what old person things do you do?
Nadine, let's start with you. Curious.
I am old, and I look out the window and think, I better get my washing done today. It's sunny because tomorrow it might be raining. And I don't go out if it's raining at nighttime. I just stay home.
Yeah.
Gosh, I think I can relate to all of those, Nadine. So those are good ones. My one definitely is, I think about when I go shopping. I don't like going like food shopping with lots of people. So I go like either really early, or I try to miss when like school pickup is as well. So there's less people around. And yeah, I really kind of time it with that, because I also don't want to hit traffic either.
No.
Yeah, that's real.
That's very sensible. Well,
Ash.
I like to tuck things in. So when it's cold, I like to tuck my top into my pants so my back doesn't get cold. And I like to tuck my pajama pants into my socks so my feet and my ankles don't get cold. And yes, that's recently been brought to my attention that it is quite an old person thing to do. My nana used to do it to me when I was little, so I think, yeah, it's
tuck your singlet in.
Yeah, tuck your singlet in.
Yeah. Look, that's very practical. And maybe that's what happens as you get a little bit older, as you go for practicalities.
Well, that's it.
There we go. Less ageist there.
Yeah. Always a silver lining, Dana.
That's right.
All right. Do you want to talk us through the abstract for this paper?
I would love to. All right. Well, here we go. So the purpose of this study was to determine the feasibility of using parent-reported outcome measures as repeated outcome measures of change at weekly intervals for children with dyskinetic cerebral palsy. The secondary aim was to explore the efficacy of individualised movement intervention. So this research team used a single subject research design on 3 children with dyskinetic cerebral palsy. This included a baseline of 5 weeks, an intervention period of 8 weeks, followed by a follow-up of 5 weeks. All children completed 18 weeks of the study with no missing data. There was evidence of parent-reported improvements in their child's pain and care and comfort between baseline and intervention phases. The researchers conclude that parent-reported outcome measures were feasible to assess pain, sleep, and comfort before and after an intervention in children with dyskinetic cerebral palsy.
There we go. All right. So, Nadine, let's start with a question about study design, because the single subject research design maybe isn't so familiar for our listeners, but I think it's something that it's really important that we have a good understanding of it, because I think it's a way that we can really help to answer some of those clinical questions that we have. So could you explain to everyone what your study design was and why you chose it?
Yeah, well, it was a team decision to do this, and I couldn't have done it without all of the team. And in particular, Natasha Baer, who's a biostatistician and helped us set the study design up along with everybody else, including Ash, again, who's also on this paper. But basically, because kids with CP are also different, you can't just group them together and compare them to each other. And so the single subject research design means that the child actually acts as their own control. So you have 5 weeks where you just complete assessments, and it's like a baseline period, and you're trying to establish stability in that period. And then you put the intervention in and you do the same set of assessments, and what you're looking for is a change between the baseline and the intervention. And then there was 5 weeks at the end. That was just a follow-up. But we mainly looked at differences between phase A, which was the baseline, and phase B, which was the intervention.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, I absolutely love single subject research designs, also known as SCARED, single case experimental designs as well. And recently there's been publications about how robust they are. You know, they're more than, they can't be confused with a case study, can they? And there's distinct differences about that. Can you talk us through some, I think you spoke a bit about it there, but more specifically, what are the main differences between a single subject research design and a case study?
Case studies are really like pre-post intervention. So they're not a really high level of evidence.
Yeah.
Actually, when we tried to publish this paper, most people wrote that it would fit into a case study, and we had to actually write back and say, no, we collected prospective data.
That's right.
The child was their own control, and we could also use a blinded assessor at different time points to score the child's dystonia as well.
Yeah.
So they are quite different.
They are. And like you said before, when you have a population like CP where, everyone is so unique.
Yes.
It's to be able to design a study in the way that a child acts as their own control is much more meaningful than trying to pull everyone together and tease out, average differences, because, what is average?
Yeah. That's right. And there's so much strength to that. And hopefully as we keep talking about the study and the study design throughout our conversation today, you'll be able to see the applicability even in your practice in terms of if you want to get into research, this is a great design. And it was one of my first studies that I did was single case design as well. And, you just get so much information, but it's very robust because you do use statistical methods. And there's a variety of things that you do look at that to see if there's changes.
Yeah. You don't, because they're quasi-statistical methods, you don't need power to. So you can actually use those methods in a pilot design because they're not dependent on the power calculation, and I think that's a strength too.
Yeah. I think it also gives you a really in-depth understanding of your population and what it is that you're trying to measure as well. During that baseline period, when you are looking for stability, it really, helps you to think really deeply about, what that intervention phase is going to look like and start to, plan those next steps as well.
Yeah. No, well done. It takes a lot of work actually to do these designs because it's such an intensive collection of data, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's so valuable.
It's a really good point. And if I was designing it, you don't know what you don't know when you start out, but I think having less weekly assessments but still getting what you want is probably the key.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that the children that we did were, they have so many comorbidities that collecting weekly assessments is quite challenging because at any particular, you have to be flexible to get all your data, because if you just say, I'm only going to see this kid on Tuesday every week, that probably won't happen.
Not very practical. Yeah.
They might end up with seizures or in hospital or be
Yeah,
So.
absolutely. And I think that leads to the next part really nicely. I thought we just talk about the actual population itself and why you chose to study design for this population. Look, for as long as I've known you, Nadine, you've been, so instrumental in developing a lot of the work and practice and support around children with cerebral palsy, in particular dyskinetic cerebral palsy, who are typically classified within GMFCS level 4 and 5.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit in terms of, dyskinetic cerebral palsy. What is that and what does that encompass and what do we tend to see in children that present with dyskinetic CP?
So, it is quite a small population. It's really only about sort of up to 15% of people with cerebral palsy. But as you said, those kids tend to have really high functional impairments. So they're functioning at max 5 and GMFCS 4 or 5. And they have a movement disorder that is a combination of dystonia and choreathetosis. And dystonia tends to be the predominant motor type in most of the children. So, most of the kids have more dystonia than choreathetosis.
Yep.
And what we know and we see clinically is that the kids that have significant dystonia also have chronic pain. So dystonia causes pain and pain drives dystonia and pain drives anxiety. And lots of the kids can't necessarily self-report, but their CFCS level may be a 2 or 3 with communication devices.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we need to give these kids more opportunity to self-report. We need to be really cognizant of that. But then we've also got a spectrum of kids that can't self-report. So, and I think, I see clinically a lot of the kids are very anxious.
And
And that drives their dystonia as well.
And I think, when you talk about pain, let's just go back to what Mark Peterson was saying on the podcast a few weeks ago, right? He's like, children do grow up, you do have adults with cerebral palsy, and pain is such a big driver for psychological morbidity. And he listed so much there. So this is really important. And though it's, in this particular kind of presentation, it's up to 15%. The medical needs, the allied health needs are actually very significant. Like it's heavily weighted, and there's so much to it.
Yeah, we most of this paper actually came from an audit that we did in the movement program with a lot of support from the clinicians in that work in the clinic, including Dr. Valentine and Dr. Richardson. So it was a real team, and we audited the children, and 82% of them had clinically significant pain using a behavioural assessment, the Paediatric Pain Profile, which is valid and reliable. So, that's how we and the parents told us what helps their child's pain. In this questionnaire, they can write down what helps your child. And they told us, moving my child helps, and repositioning them and taking them out of their chair and gentle stretching. And we were like, we do all that, but there's no evidence. And so then we did this.
Yeah, no, that's great. So I guess that sort of describes a little bit of the allied health input already, and our role that we could possibly play in all of that. But there's other things that we can look into that as well, can't we, in terms of potential interventions?
Yeah, so can you talk to us a bit about some of the medical treatments that are available to these kids as well?
Yeah, so most of the children have really complex medical management that includes oral medications to help with dystonia, plus or minus botulinum toxin if there's a focal area to target. And then the children that, despite complex medical management, still have significant issues with care and comfort and sleep and pain, those kids can actually then be worked up for intrathecal baclofen, which is quite an invasive procedure, but it can be very, very helpful. Yeah.
So kind of on that, I know this is not in the paper, but we've spoken about it before, in terms of things that do cause pain. And it's been a topic of our conversation clinically before in terms of ankle foot orthoses in children with dyskinetic CP, particularly dystonia. And I think that's the key factor in terms of causing pain. Can we talk about that a bit? It's a little bit off the cuff, but I know that's something that I think clinicians will face quite frequently. We're often told, we need to wear AFOs to maintain good functional position for their legs, but it has an impact.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the kids that we see have quite significant distal dystonia.
Yeah.
So what you see is really strong posturing with any effort. And I guess that's the definition. That's what you have to remember.
Yep.
Dystonia increases with effort. So when the kid's at rest and sitting there, their foot might look quite nice and it might sit in an AFO quite well.
Yeah.
But as soon as they start talking or writing or, say they're outside at lunchtime and they're happy and they're playing with their friends, the muscle tone kicks in with any sort of effort. And what we find is that these little feet are pushing into hard plastic and it can be really, really painful. In fact, it was the third most common source of pain in our audit, which we did in 2015, at the end of 2015. And, there's no real easy answer. I just try and say to families, just talk to your author to show them what his foot does when he talks.
Yeah.
We need lots of, a thick neoprene splint. We need to think about other options. We need to think about sometime in AFO, sometime in, Piedro boots or something. And we can't just stick kids in a splint and think that they're going to tolerate them because it's not okay.
No.
And I guess that's the role that therapists, clinicians can play in this, is that, we often are in a lot of contact with our families and they may only see their orthotist once or twice a year. Yeah. But if we're there and we can identify that, knowing it's a source of pain. And then I think back to Terry Sanger, the very intelligent neurologist, and he was talking a lot about dystonia and how there can be so many different triggers. It could be a bit of wind, the sensory part of it that can trigger dystonia is huge. So whatever materials we're using, where our straps are is how some of our children will respond. Yeah. And the firmer, I find clinically, the firmer the support, the more they push against it as well, because they're levering off that too. So It's very complex,
It's
isn't it?
really hard, yeah. And I must admit, for a lot of those kids, I'm not pro AFOs.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, lots of them do need it because it impacts on their function. They can't stand otherwise.
Yeah.
But it's not easy. It's really hard. And we just keep trying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but it's good to be able to talk about it as well. I think if you're a therapist, working with someone and you might not have as much access to different clinicians, it's good to kind of know actually it is hard.
Yeah.
And you need to look at it, and it's very collaborative. It's a team working with a family.
And you have to look at the way the kid's posturing, because a lot of them with dystonia actually pull into dorsiflexion.
That's right. Yeah.
So like we'll get this, splint that's designed to control plantar flexion, but that's not the way the kid moves.
That's right.
So it's just, dystonia is tricky. It doesn't just do the same thing.
Yeah. It's good to distinguish. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit in a bit more detail about the participants, the 3 participants that you had for this study. Could you tell us a little bit about their presentation?
Yeah, so all of the children were GMFCS 5, max 5, and one of them was CFCS 4, but the other 2 were CFCS 5, and they all had quite significant secondary consequences of cerebral palsy, so mainly musculoskeletal, so kyphoscoliosis, costopelvic impingement, fixed flexion deformity. 2 of the children actually had quite significant seizure disorders. They all had gastroesophageal reflux. One has known significant osteoporosis. I think they probably all did. Visual impairment. So like these are the kids that are, they've got the most significant functional limitations and they are reliant on their parents. So that's why there's a that long title of our paper. So it's like parent-reported outcome measures.
No, that's good. And how old were they, Nadine?
So they were 14, 15 and 16, I think.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And we've touched on the parent report aspect a little bit now, but so I think, it's quite clear why you would choose for parents to report on pain for these children.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of your other outcome measures. The Paediatric Pain Profile. Why did you choose that one for this study?
So that was the thing I was most interested in. And so the Paediatric Pain Profile is, I think I mentioned briefly before because we used it in our audit as well. Yeah. It's a behavioural assessment. So what it does is it lists 20 behavioural cues that indicate pain. And so the parent can score what their child does when they're having a good day and then what they do when they're having a bad day. And then they can put a name on that if they want, and they can identify up to 3 sources of pain. And if you get 14 or more, it indicates clinically significant pain. The thing is, some of the kids do some of those behaviours when they're not in pain, but what you're looking for is generally, and there's a table in the paper, I think most of the kids were a lot lower on a good day, like say 7, and then when they're in pain, say they were 21.
Wow.
Yeah.
So we want the kids to have more good days than bad.
Yep.
Some families will say to you, I just don't know what it is. I know he's in pain. So you can just say, these are the things he does when he's in pain and this is what he's like when he's happy.
Yeah.
And it really helps the families. I mean, it's quite confronting to think that your child's in pain. And I think sometimes initially it takes a while. I have families now that used to say to me, oh, no, Nadine, he's not in any pain. But now they're coming and they go, he's doing the tooth grinding, he's been awake 3 times tonight, he's flinching when I touch him. So it's sort of an educational tool as well.
Yeah, sure.
And it's also, it's about, we need to do a good job for your kid.
Yeah.
And if this is changing, then it can help us make some changes clinically. And it can help us be more objective about what's going on and feed that back to the medical team. So it's a great tool. It's easy to use. Some families, as I said, may find it a bit confronting, and that's okay. You just say, it's not a test. There's no right or wrong. I'm just trying to do a good job here. And if your score's up in the 30s or the 20s and they're normally a 7, that's when you start thinking, okay, we need a medical review or we need to change something.
What a good guide. And how long does it take to complete?
The actual full baseline one, because families can write lots of stuff.
Sure, yeah.
That can take 15 or so minutes, but the ongoing assessment takes about 5.
Yeah.
So it's quite clinically useful.
That's
really
it
has
good.
Clinical utility.
Yeah. and that was one of your assessments that you were doing every week throughout your study.
Yeah.
The other ones that you were doing every week, you had the Care and Comfort Hypertonicity Questionnaire. Could you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
That's I probably wouldn't use that if I was going to do this again, but it is pretty easy. It's a little bit old-fashioned. It just looks at the carer burden basically when they're looking after a child that really has no independent mobility, and it's a score from 1 to 7. It's really easy or it's almost impossible.
Right.
And it can help you identify issues, but it's not a really it doesn't have good measurement properties. So I would probably suggest using the CP Child if anyone wanted to know caregiver burden.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Those are good lessons to learn through it, isn't it?
Oh,
as
yeah.
well? Yeah.
Always, yeah. And the
That's
other
why we
thing
do
you
it.
used weekly was the Sleep Disturbances Scale for children.
That is an amazing scale. It's not I really like it. It's really interesting. It really they actually changed on some of the sleep stuff, some of the kids.
Yep.
But again, it does have some items that aren't relevant for children who don't have independent mobility.
Yeah.
So you just have to be careful. You can use bits of it.
The
It's
sleep
very
routine
helpful.
and those parts of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I think is just good to prep the parents for and go, look, this is a generalized one about sleep, and just know that, some of these might not be relevant.
Yeah.
But it's a good measure, isn't it, to sort of identifying what's like the T-scores of 70. If it's above that, you kind of know it's probably not quite right. And you can identify change.
Definitely.
And then you had what you'd refer to as the probe assessment, so the COPM and the CP Qual. Could you just tell us a little bit about those and how you used them in this study?
Well, we wanted the intervention to be meaningful. So we wanted the parents to tell us, what's going on? We know your child's got pain. That was one of the criteria for this study. And what do you think would be good? To be able to tolerate lying on your side, or to be able to tolerate moving their arms to help with dressing or whatever it was. So we wanted to try and make the intervention meaningful and
it's great.
Done in partnership with the family. So that was why we used the COPM. The CP Qual, I guess it was just an overarching sort of thing. It taught me a lot actually reading the responses, and it was it's quite confronting when you look at that. But they didn't really show changes.
No.
So
it was more to guide what was happening over the intervention.
And the same with the BAD and the DIS. It was really just to describe the child's movement.
Yeah. And so, sorry, for people who maybe aren't familiar with the BAD and the DIS, could you just very briefly explain what those are?
So they're some scales that measure dystonia. So the Barry Albright Dystonia Scale and the Dyskinesia Impairment Scale. The BADS is what we use clinically because the DIS just isn't feasible to use in a clinical setting. But because we were doing research, we thought, we'll give it a go. And the BADS it's okay. It gives you a ballpark figure of how much dystonia the child has, and it's out of 32. So if you have a kid, our kids in this study were 30 out of 32, 32 out of 32. So significant dystonia. But if I said to you, this kid has 6 out of 32, then in your mind you're like, they might have a little bit of, so it just gives you an idea of the kid. But it doesn't separate choreoathetosis and dystonia, whereas the DIS does. But the DIS is out of 288. So,
practically speaking, it's
worth
quite
thinking
involved.
about. It takes a little bit longer to do. But we did do it, and we had a blinded assessor score those. So thanks to Nat Jewson who did that.
Fabulous, Nat.
Yes. It was such a great team. It's such a good time.
Yeah. And then just to kind of give everyone an idea of, from the practical side of things, how long did getting through all those assessments actually take?
it took the families don't love assessments, and I think it's really important to note that in clinical practice you don't need to do them weekly. You just you might do it at the beginning of, you know, a block of intervention or something, or you might do it once a year, you know, in clinic to keep an eye on something. I think I think probably took Nat a while to score all the dystonia stuff. The families had to do like the sleep, the
Care comfort.
the care and comfort and the PPP.
Yeah.
I think it took them probably about 10, 15 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
But we only did that for this study.
Yes.
Because we needed to see
Of course.
if there was a baseline and then for change. Yeah. Questionnaires are hard. They do give you a lot of information though, and it's just sort of getting the balance right.
I think so. And I think you're just trying to match with your population, right? And I was just thinking, you know, parents are really intuitive about their children, particularly when they have such high care needs. They're so involved. So they do know a lot about their kids. On the other side, I remember the respiratory paper that we discussed. You know, there's also questionnaires are great to pull things to light sometimes because parents can become so used to this. You're talking about kids who are nearly 15 years old. So they've done 15 years and things have become normal, but maybe they're not normal and it's worth pulling them out. So I think when we know there's not a huge amount of evidence for this area, doing questionnaires and doing things that give some objectivity is just really important. Yeah. So let's talk about the intervention side of things now. And I think the great distinction here is you talked about the weekly intervention and the contrast that is to more intensive modules where intensive modules, you're really thinking about motor learning, it's acquisition of motor skills, and that requires greater intensity. So knowing the goals are really important. And in this case, can you just talk us through the intervention in terms of what the aims were and what it included?
Yeah, so we had consumer partners at the beginning of the study, and they just said to us, look, we'd really like to know if you could just do something once a week, if that would still be helpful. And they were like, we like doing intensive stuff as well, but sometimes life is so busy, we have so many appointments, we have other children, and it'd just be nice to know that you weren't being detrimental if you only did something once a week. And so we designed the study around that.
Great.
And I got to do the intervention with my very dear friend and colleague, Simon Garvalini, and we had so much fun. We just worked with the family and the children to try and encourage movement. Basically, that's all it was, because none of these kids can move independently. And I think the goals, I've heard so many people say to me, well, that kid has no goals. And it's not about not having a goal. Being able to sit in your chair to go out with your family, being able to go to the park with your family, you know, participation, visual interaction, all those different things are important. If you can't sit in your chair because you've got too much pain, then that's not okay. So our movement intervention was just really about gentle mobilisation and changes of posture and movement for all the different joints in the body. And we focused on moving the kids out of end range dystonic postures. And it's interesting if you can get a little head around to the middle, someone might actually look at you or smile. But if you're stuck with your head off to one side, it's not only painful, you can't interact with your family at all. So it was really basic physio, OT, movement, rolling, modified weight bearing, supported sitting, depending on what, you know, one of the kids had a really, really bad costopelvic impingement, so she could never sit because it would just, so, you know, like Simon would support her spine and give some traction, and I'd do weight bearing through her feet, and she loved it. But it was all very individualised to the child.
For sure. That's great.
And the one session a week.
Yes. Yeah, and they, I did lots of the assessments and video. I did home visits, but we got them to come into the gym to do the therapy.
So nice. I love it. Yep.
It was good.
Yeah. So let's talk about what you found, your results. And I suppose you made the point earlier, but just to reiterate that the types of analyses that you do in single subject designs aren't, I suppose, your traditional statistics, are they?
No.
it's more what we call like quasi statistical methods. So what kinds of things were you looking at with regards to the your outcome measures?
So the first thing was actually, as it says in the title, the feasibility of using those assessments to assess. And so that was feasibility was assessed by the amount of missing data we had, and we didn't have any.
Yeah.
So
because as I said, like if someone was having seizures on Tuesday, I went on Friday.
Sure. Yeah.
So I didn't have any missing data. And then what we really focused on for the other stuff was the change between phase A and phase B. So you do that by visual analysis and graphs. And if anyone reads the paper, you can see the beautiful graphs that Tasha did and the tables of the, how do you say that? Quasi.
I
always say quasi because I have no clue. Yeah.
However it comes out.
Yeah. And you look at like the little dots in the baseline, and then you look at the dots in the intervention, and you want to see if they're different, hopefully lower, because we wanted less pain.
Yeah,
great.
So they were the main things.
That's so cool. And that was something that was talked about as a team, wasn't it? You know, we went through those in quite a lot of detail and spent a lot of time actually inspecting them and reaching consensus on what we thought was happening between those two phases.
Yeah.
So it is, the name suggests sometimes that it's not, but it actually is a really involved and robust way of looking at the data, isn't it?
Yeah. And then if there was no visual analysis change, if the data was supported by two of the other methods, then we said that there was it was a supported.
That's so good.
Yeah.
But Tashi was amazing doing all of that.
Yeah. She's a bit of an expert in this area, isn't she?
Sure is.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the results. I guess, you know, to summarize what you saw in all three, you know, you sort of just talked about there already that it was feasible to do the parent outcome, which I think is great. That in itself says a lot about the measures itself and why, and the method in terms of being flexible. I think that speaks to that, right? It's not rigid, and we understand this population. That's important. What else did you find?
So all of the children actually had decreases in their behavioural pain cues during the intervention period. So that was fantastic.
That's so good.
Yeah. And it was only once a week. But I think as well, when you actually sit down, like a lot of these families, because equipment is such a key thing for participation, a lot of them, most of their funding gets chewed up by that stuff. They don't necessarily always have hands-on therapy, and if they do get hands-on therapy, sometimes it's at school, and then the mum and dad don't, or the family aren't always aware of what's going on. So I think maybe when they were with us and they were supervising us, you know, we were going, does this look okay? And can you watch his face? And I'm going to try this, but tell me if you don't think it's okay. And so they were in there and they were with us, and they brought carers in, and we just had such a lovely time. And I think if you give someone a little bit of that, often then it gives them a bit more motivation. So I don't know whether maybe they did a bit more while they were seeing
empowering.
us. Yeah.
Because that's a treatment. You're describing a treatment that's done with the family essentially. Because it's so true. Like how many times when you are treating a child, particularly because they're probably really long, they're 15, right? So you're probably trying to do some mobilization in their legs and you can't see their face, and their parents can read their face so well. And we're valuing the input from parents because they know their children really well, and we're coming together for an intervention. That's actually so powerful.
They all came every week into the hospital, and
it's motivating.
Let's face it, they don't like coming in there.
No.
So, you know, I think so I think I'm not saying that what we did was the only thing that decreased their pain. What I'm trying to say is that I think perhaps just that little bit of time and energy, and do you know what? Oh, put your hand there. Can you feel that? And it's all the stuff that we do all the time. And that's why this paper is for the therapists out there, because you're doing all this stuff. And we're all trying, and it's not high level evidence, but their pain did decrease, and that's a huge thing. And some of the kids actually had better maintaining sleep, and a few of them had I think two of them had some changes in the care and comfort stuff.
Yeah. And we also spoke to the families at the end of the study. We went and did, you know, some in-depth interviews with them, and got got their perspective on it. And I think, you know, some of that's included in the discussion in the paper, but, you know, they all said that, that the intervention was really feasible and something they were willing to do because they could, see the benefits for their child, but also they found it really interesting and educational as well. So those things that you kind of, you felt were happening over the intervention period, they really backed that up, didn't they?
Yeah, and I think the paediatric pain, I know I keep talking about that, but I just think some of these families like start going, oh, you know, they know that their kid's in pain, but then they can just go, they can look at this and it helps them to be sure of what, you know, to trust themselves. So I think that's very educational as well.
And again, I'm reminded of the respiratory checklist. You know, it's not until you have that kind of guide and those cues in front of you to help kind of hone your attention that you start to be able to really focus on and pay attention to the nuances in things like pain.
That's right.
Like you say, become kind of normalised after a while, don't they?
Yeah, they do.
It's actually very F words. I mean, when you bring it back down to it, it is F words through and through. You're valuing the family and what is function. Well, actually, function does look different for this population. Let's be clear what that is, right? Where, you know, I've put in, you know, the trial I did for locomotor training for populations that tend to use more equipment. It was like, well, you shouldn't be training kids to walk. I'm like, I'm not saying that, but I want to get them upright and move because they enjoy that. That's function for them because that impacts so many different domains. That's called function and that's health and well-being. And when you can frame it along those F words, you know, I think it ticks all the boxes. And when you are advocating for families to have funding, you go, okay, yes, they have a lot of equipment needs. Yes, there's a lot of appointments there, but they may benefit from this as well in conjunction when they're about to get their new piece of equipment. They need to get used to getting into their chair. You know, let's help them with their movement before they get in. And then they'll, you know, it just facilitates all of that. So it's a different population and the goals are different. Your approach is different, but they're still goals, right? And I think that's important.
It's really important. And if that means that, you know, a therapist can go into a school and say, oh, no, I'm going to move this kid because of this, you know, and advocate for stuff like that, then that's really important too.
Right, because some of these kids, like you said, they're CF/CS5. You know, the only way they can let us know they're in pain is they can cry and they can scream. By the time you're in that point, you know, it's dystonia. So it's hit that cycle, and to break that cycle sometimes requires more medical intervention. That's another appointment. You know?
All right, Nadine, you told us that a few times that this paper is for clinicians.
Yes.
So what are your key take-home messages for clinicians out of this paper and what you've learnt?
I think movement opportunities for all children are really, really important. And if you don't move, you get pain. And keep going with what you're doing, guys, because it's really important.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And understand the goals of your intervention, right?
Yeah. Don't just think just because they can't move, they don't have a goal. Because it's like Dana said, it's just a bit different. And it's about being able to tolerate being moved so that you can be positioned, so that you can interact, so you can go out with your family, so you can get put in the car in a wheelchair, so you get to go to the zoo instead of being left home in a bed.
That's right.
Yeah, it's not about that. It's not about that hour or whatever it is in isolation. It's about what that hour means for all the other facets of their life, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. Well, Nadine, that was brilliant. I love that. Now we've got to go into our next segment where we put it all together and see what Ed has to say about it. So get ready. We're going to our next segment, which everyone keeps telling me is their favourite segment, which means you're all listening to the end. That's good. So let's get into Tell It to Ed. Ed, as you know, is our producer. He's been listening on all of these conversations. He doesn't have a background in child health, but he's been really getting some great insights into this area. So Nadine, in about 60 seconds or so, can I get you to summarise this research that you did to someone who doesn't have a background in child health?
Okay. So what we did is we tried to work with 3 children, but first of all, we got some assessments to see how they were, and then we did some therapy with them. We moved them around and rolled them and helped all their muscles and joints, and we did the same assessments, and then we just looked to see if what we did was helpful. And the main thing we were looking for was to see that our therapy was hopefully helping with pain, not increasing it, because no therapy should ever cause pain. Actually, I wanted to say that.
That's really good.
Ever.
Really good point. Thank you, Nadine. All right, Ed, over to you.
Wow. I quite like that last statement about the whole therapy not causing kids pain.
Such a good point. So important.
I don't have much of an insight into this sort of thing, but the pain aspect of it, and I need to find a better word, but it's fascinating to me because I'm trying to fathom how it is that someone lives with this kind of a debilitation or a disability and the pain that's associated with that. And I'm curious about your study in your paper is the tolerance level for pain. Is that taken into account? Is there some element of people living with this pain where the tangibility, their awareness of pain is affected at all, and whether that was kind of taken into, I'm sure it was taken into account, but from a layman's perspective, how is that kind of taken into account?
I guess in the past, people used to think that just because you couldn't say you're in pain, you weren't in pain. And the same thing happened in neonates as well. They just used to do all these painful things to people and think, oh, well, it's fine. And there's quite a few, there's a lot of research out there that says that these kids all feel pain. So we always are always watching and talking to the families about if their child is in pain. I think that pain is normalised a lot in this population. I think that most of the families are just used to it. And that's why when I was saying, like that little assessment that we use that looks at all those behaviours, that's why that's so important, because we don't want people to think that that's okay. And that's why I'm doing my PhD too, because it's not okay.
That's right.
Wow, that's great.
I don't know if I answered you properly.
No, I think so. I think it's really interesting to know that that all of that is kind of taken into account from an outside perspective. It's difficult to understand sometimes how that's kind of taken into account, but I'm learning a lot. It's been 51 episodes, so I'm getting there.
Yeah. I think it's sometimes you do hear people say, my child's got a very high pain threshold.
Yes.
And I don't know how many times I've heard that.
I know, I agree.
Oh, but have we normalised it? I guess that's what you're trying to say, Ed. Like they're so used to it that it takes an extreme amount of pain to say, oh, that was painful. But actually
that's
all that
okay.
other stuff was not okay.
Yeah.
And this is...
And repeated pain experiences can cause quite significant problems as well. Just with anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think there's lots of acute painful things that our kids have to go through as well as the chronic pain. But I mean, I've had teenagers walk up to me and go, or not even walk, wheel up to me, whatever. I still think about that orthopedic surgery I had every day and how awful it was.
Yep, gosh.
Like it's not, it's not okay just because you've got a disability to not have the services that not saying we are trying, and some of the kids get some of the best practice services, but it's not routine clinical practice at the moment.
And do you think it sometimes gets swallowed up in the complexity of the issues that these families are having to deal with? Pain sometimes gets lost because there's lots of other things going on that need to be addressed. And
there's so many other things.
Yeah.
I mean, just tummy stuff,
big time.
Yeah. So
really, really big. And I remember, we're digressing, but not really. But, even just getting a child up and moving, I remember one mum saying it just reduced the gas that was in her belly. And that was a huge source of discomfort.
Pain, yeah.
She's like, I didn't realize that, didn't know what to do with it. And it was hard to get her up. But when she got up and she moved, she wasn't there for long. But, we've all had that before.
Made a
we
difference.
sit on the plane for too long and there's a bit of a buildup of gas. It's
uncomfortable.
painful. It's it's very unpleasant. So so Nadine, you raised so many great points today.
Yeah.
It was such a pleasure to talk to you. I love every conversation I have with you. And I feel like every time after we talk, I spiral into more work. I'm like, oh my gosh, we need to do this, which is great because it stimulates that for so many people.
Yeah.
So thank you, Nadine.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Your passion is infectious.
It is. Absolutely love it. So remember, to all of our listeners, if you want access to the run sheet notes, the link to the paper, head to our website, researchworks.net. And there's a CPD form there that you can fill out as well if you want to keep this as a record of your PD requirements. And also just to remember to subscribe to our podcast so you know when new episodes are coming out. And it's just a great way to, just to keep up with all the things that we're doing. But for now, we'll say goodbye and thank you. And we'll talk to you all again next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.